And welcome everybody to TNM Coaching Unplugged podcast and Zoran Todorovic Interconnected podcast. Thank you so much for coming every Monday to look into this and to listen to this amazing space when we are inviting you to elevate your heart, to elevate your mind, to elevate your soul and your body to the next level of itself, to get inspired with the tools and techniques of coaching, leadership development training, and so on and so forth. We're so grateful that you're with us and that you're coming to our podcast every week. And today I have a very beautiful and dear colleague and friend, Sabreena, who is joining us. Let me tell you about Sabreena because she is remarkable, not only on the level of the competence, because she has multiple degrees and certifications, which is also so important in our field of work, but also she's an amazing human being. Sabreena is whole system thinker. She has a deep experience in senior and executive and also organizational development. She's also skilled in leadership development training, executive development, workshop facilitation, and workshop design. She also coaches a lot, the C-suite of people in different multinationals and international organizations. Also, she's a mentor coach, and she also does supervision and action learning. She holds the PhD in organizational development and change and double master degrees in social science and counseling. So she's a specialist in human development. And on top of all of this, she is a master certified coach with International Coach Federation. And she's remarkable. And today we're going to have a lovely conversation. We're going to see where this conversation is going to take us. But we're going to start with historical imprints. Sabreena, welcome.
Thank you, Zoran. That was such a lovely introduction. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to be able to beat it.
You know what I do every time we have a podcast? I'll replay it to you. A lot of the people say the same because I kind of go like, big. But it's also important for people to know a little bit about you, to know who you are, what comes up. And I'm sure that you can live to the expectations of yourself, the audience, myself. We're going to have fun. Yeah?
Yeah, fantastic.
So let's dive into this topic. I mean, when we prepared and chatted a little bit about our recording, you said, well, I would really love to talk a little bit about this historical imprints and what those are and what those means. For me, that was also a new term. I'm sure many people don't even know what is that about. So why don't we dive into that?
Sure. So if you'd really like to know how I kind of arrived at this place was because when I first became a coach, I remember that I would hit obstacles with my clients. Mm-hmm. And I remember one particular time when my coaching client brought up a trauma that they had suffered in their background. And I told her, I said, I'm not equipped to work with you, and I really need to ethically refer you to someone else. And she said, I don't want to go see a therapist. I want to talk to you because you know my story. And I really felt so very torn. And that is actually one of the reasons why I then ended up becoming a psychotherapist, because I thought if I have people like this coming to me, I need to know some of the psychological underpinnings and narratives that people bring from their background. Mm-hmm. So that started my love affair with psychology, which was really informed from coming to that space through the coaching, which is really around behavior. And as you know, in the space of coaching, it's about taking people forward. And if we visit the past, it is because we visit it to find resources to take us into the future. Right. And when we touch on trauma, we don't really, as coaches, really go into that space because it can be like a bottomless pit. So a good start of looking at what that means, I think, is that it also showed up when I did my doctoral studies, was that I noticed that some of the key themes that showed up in leadership was that people's leadership is informed by their learning from upbringing, which I later coined as the historical imprints. Yeah. And those things that we learn from our upbringing is informed, of course, by not only our culture, it's our society, and really quite deeply sometimes from the childhood conditioning. And when I think about the childhood conditioning, that's the family system. So there are themes that we learn from being part of the family, consciously or unconsciously, that has its own laws, just like nature would, or it's just like nature would, or governments or organizations. Families have its own laws and orders and patterns of personal behaviors and relationships that are not only spoken but are unspoken. And I feel that we learn to coexist with them. And guess what? As we grow up, I find that it shows up then in leadership. I mean, what do you think?
I also think that that's so important because those patterns just become instrumental part of who we are. I used to call them the software of your hardware, right? You know, if you are the hardware in a technological sense, you're interfacing with life and you're showing the ups and you're showing how beautiful you are, but there's this software behind that is program that we run.
Yeah. And that's a great word, because that idea of the programming that we have is the conditioning that we're so unaware of how it suddenly shows up.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that when I've been hijacked by something that I didn't even realize was happening up until later, that can be really concerning, especially for leaders in an organization where they're supposed to have so many different multidimensional attributes of the way they lead people, and constantly in the being visible to people, especially as you go up the organization. And I think that is really very important for leaders to start thinking of themselves and the conditioning that also drives the way they show up.
Mm-hmm.
So, I feel that historical imprints aren't talked about enough in leadership development. We tend to talk about it softly, as in, from a place like I said, resource, as a resource, but we don't really look at the ugly parts of it.
Yes. So what are the ugly parts of this historical imprints? What is showing up when you coach somebody or you're in a relationship with the people in the workshop or training? So what shows up?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because, an ugly truth would be a power dynamic, for example.
Right.
Okay. Is that if, for example, in a family, a child has been influenced by hierarchy and it's been unhealthy, where a caregiver, we could call it the father, mother, or even relatives, have shouted at them, have not treated them well, or there might have even been some abuse. That child has not been able to grow up in a healthy way and has not been able to construct the ability to speak up, without being punished. So that could show up when they enter the workplace. And it happened, actually, I brought up that story because it happened recently, where one of my clients actually talked about their inability to speak up. It was because they were told not to cry. They were told not to, and I'm using the word they, so rather than referring to she or he,
of course.
that they were referred to as, as being weak if you cry, as not being competent, and you stop crying now and just get on with it. So guess what? Imagine going into the workplace, then that person, the grown-up person, will then not show their feelings, will go into action mode because they've been taught not to speak up. Or if they have an opinion, then that has been knocked out of them.
Of course.
Yeah.
They're not able.
They're not able to speak up. So it's almost like, I feel that there are these shoulds that people inherit unconsciously. And as soon as I hear I should, or I must, or I have to, I inquire into where does that come from?
Yeah.
Where is the should?
Yeah. And I love the word that you use, and inquire from. Where is that coming from? That level of creating the awareness, or you're shedding the light on that trauma, distortion, imprint that needs to be transformed. It usually comes from the I must, I should, I ought to do something that I've been conditioned to do no matter what.
And I think that that's really where the transformation comes from.
Mm-hmm.
If we're really in the business of helping someone to be better, to be their best self, to actualize potential, it's really the idea of not the transactional space of just changing behavior, because we can all do that for a really short time and do it really well. Yeah. I know I can.
I can too.
We can. But really, the place of transformation is the shift in the limiting belief of what is possible, and reprinting, if I may call it that, reprinting a different narrative. Mm-hmm. Because I've seen that in my own life on how that has shown up, and when we talked about themes or patterns, mm-hmm. Power is one of them. The power dynamic. Another one, I think, is also people's relationship with money.
Of course.
It shows up a lot. Scarcity versus abundance.
Yep. Yep. And I love that you mentioned the word transformation and evolution. The real change or real transformation happens when we are vulnerable enough to go into that space and open up and address it, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, we can just bypass, and we can change behavior by bypassing and keep on bypassing, but then it bottles up, and then life works in a mysterious way. It shows up in life at one point in time. It just pops up, right?
It just pops up. It just pops up. One of the things that I've found has been really interesting in the way I grew up is that I grew up in a culture where if you became a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant, that means that you were successful. Mm-hmm. That means I was fulfilling my mother's or father's dream of having a well-rounded child who had gone through education and become a professional. And it's being a coach has been just so challenging for my mother, because she would ask me until recently, and so what do you do?
I love that.
So what do you do? I mean, she is 90 now. But the whole point is that unless we're aware of what that could trigger or arise, of that sense of like, oh my goodness, I haven't fulfilled some expectation of my parents, and then what do I need to do to become that? Mm-hmm. And when that begins to soften because of the awareness of where that root is, I think that that's really the place of transformation.
Yeah. And for me, it's also realizing those imprints. You mentioned beliefs, that the layers and layers of beliefs that we have adopted from our family, from our society, from the family constellation, which is expanded, family, uncles, aunts, everything that's going on inside in our environment, then the school, then the university, then the job, right? We are so open to receive and then make them into reality when we start believing them, because as you know, and I know well, when you start believing something, it becomes reality in your life, right?
Absolutely. So how we think influences how we act, how we act influences how we relate to each other, and then really the way we find meaning and purpose in the world. So
that's it. So the real work is actually understanding those beliefs, those imprints, becoming aware, right?
Yeah.
Looking into them, giving them the light, and questioning yourself in inquiry. Why do I think in this way? What makes me believe that? Where did this belief come from? I know in my own life, I had a bunch of beliefs that were absolutely given to me through my ancestral line, from my grandfathers and also fathers. They were just passing it on, and it becomes the firm belief that everybody subscribes to, until I started coaching and personal development. And I was like, hold on a second, is that really what I really want to believe? Is that my choice? Is this me? Am I authentic when I say this? Or am I fulfilling some kind of the role? So I think it's super important for us to be in the space of exploring this in your own life, with coach, with counselor, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it does take some level of courage and bravery to start going into that inquiry with our past. Because I do hear and have experienced, and people that I know, including clients, who say, I don't want to go there. And that's okay, just respecting that choice, because I'm aware that it could be painful.
Yeah.
It could be painful.
Yeah. And transformation sometimes.
That's why they call it the growth edge.
Edge, transformation sometimes it comes with the pain, but it also had this amazing, result when we kind of persevere with our courage. And I love that you mentioned with courage, to courageously engage in the transformational process and go through the pain and have a support. I mean, we don't need to do this all by ourselves, right? That's why coaches and other personal development professionals exist, because they're there to help you move through that process, experience what you need to experience, but then come on the other side.
Yeah. And, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because in a separate conversation, I think you and I had talked about the value of really knowing how we feel it in our body. Because, when you talk about coaching, asking the question is one thing. Where does that come from? The inquiry. And during that inquiry, really becoming aware of what's going on in the body as I'm speaking it, like the tightness in my chest, or the feeling in my head, or, where is this located? Because if we follow it, we'll be able to get there much quicker and to help it, to discover really what's going on. And usually it sits in the heart or somewhere in the belly, I find. Because as children and in those early years of conditioning, we were not able to speak up and ask for what we wanted. So it got buried somewhere in our body. We had this cellular memory. And really, if I was going to follow the breadcrumbs, is to really just see where the body holds it. Yeah. Using our own somatic intelligence, and our innate awareness of where we hold these triggers in our body, so that when it happens in the moment, that we are conscious of what's going on, so that we're being able to respond rather than react. Because if we weren't aware of it, as I know, if I wasn't aware of or being witness to what was going on in my body, I'm more likely going to react. And there have been times when I've been really reactive. But increasingly, I'm finding that just becoming aware of what's going on in my body really helps for me to be present, be in this moment, in the now. What about you?
I think for me, that was one of the most important practices, especially in the last 2 years, being able to be present in my physical body, because my tendency is to get really heady and really busy with my mind, especially with the technology and screens. So I'm consistently encouraging others who are listening, and myself, to practice presencing, in the body. And as you said beautifully, listening to what's going on. Listening to the feeling. Where is that sadness? Where is that confusion? Where is that passion? Where is that joy? And then becoming aware immediately presents me as well. But I'm practicing this for I know for myself and for a lot of people, when you have busy life, that becomes one of the most important practice presencing. And then also breath, what I realize as well, that when we start being present in our physical form, we need to be aware of our breath work. How are we breathing right now, right here? Are we shallow? We have deep belly breath, what's going on in our arms, and I think the physical body never lies. And I think mind can be tricking us to believe certain things about reality, but I think physical body is very honest. So that relationship, it's so sacred and so important, isn't it? To honor that.
So up until now, Zoran, we've been talking about what we individually feel.
Mm-hmm.
What we haven't talked about is what happens when those two atoms meet each other.
Mm-hmm.
And when we trigger each other. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If I said something that comes from my own historical imprints and it touches something that brings up your historical imprint,
Mm-hmm.
I find that that is really a recipe for where the interpersonal issues start to get really complex and complicated. And that's why we all have jobs, right? You know, we're in the work of development in the workplace. And what I'm finding more and more is as complexity intensifies, that those relationships, if we can call them like these little collective atoms, are also having these complex things and patterning that's going on, and not enough inquiry because into where it's coming from, because people are having to move so fast because of the tech, because of all the emails that are coming at them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so the movement into accomplishment and doing is so much faster. But these two people aren't being present to what's the real issue. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's happening. I mean, I wonder what you think of that.
For me, this is where the juice is, right? This is where the things really do happen, you know, in this connection with people. They might trigger you. I know I can be triggered, and something might get me into that space of reactive behavior because it's touching upon some kind of historical imprint that I haven't processed. So if, for example, I was not valued enough or heard enough. If I'm in a business meeting and I am not giving space to be valued and heard, I will become reactive. What might happen with my reaction, I might tend to either overcompensate and talk too much, or withdraw completely and just be quiet and silent and not say anything and not give my contribution, right? So I think right now, because it's so intense, you know, as you beautifully said, due to the complexity, digitality, the world spinning in a fast pace, but also what's going on with the energies of the planet as well. We are in this melting pot where we have to work it out. And that's our invitation to the audience, right? So to become aware of this, and then how can we do this? What are the tools that we have on our disposal to be able to work it out and be fully present in the relationships?
Yeah. So, and that's really it, because I think what's happening right now is that as that level of intensity comes, and, you know, when we're in contact, the natural inclination is to separate, to detach, to pull away, to avoid, or to ignore. And what you said, the real juice is to stay connected and to be able to generate a different type of dialogue, which could really, you know, bring a different type of a conversation than that one, which is much more connected and aware, because we're in service of finding out what's really going on for each other, rather than just saying, I need to take care of myself and off I go.
So what would you say, I mean, when this kind of intensity happens, what are some of the things that you're observing are working well for people in business, in life, you know, because we're all in that mental melting pot of intensity, powered by our historical imprints and beliefs and unconscious behavior. So what works for you, for your clients, for us?
Well, for myself, I can speak for myself, is that, you know, there's a good news and the bad news, because in that contact, the bad news that while you're in that contact, you have no awareness because you're just being triggered or I'm being triggered. But I think the real inner work is the stuff that happens even before. Yeah. Is the journey of really going into that inquiry of, like, what are some of the historical imprints that I bring with me into every conversation? Yeah. And I'm not saying I'm carrying a big load or baggage, because some of those things are really positive.
Yeah.
You know, like, I know, like, a really positive thing is that I love to feed people, you know, because in my family, we showed love through food.
Wonderful.
And even at sometimes, even after a facilitation or at the university, we'll be like, okay, I'm gonna bring a cake, or we'll show up with something because that's the sharing of food, and that becomes a way of connecting. So that's just a fun, lighthearted thing. But what about the other stuff that we bring in? Yeah. The things that we just get angry about without even knowing why we get angry, and we think it's the person in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
I always say that person is such a gift. Yeah, they're just the object of something far deeper or greater.
Mm-hmm.
That if I was to inquire, or that person was to inquire, or what was going on, there might really be a gem here or a jewel. So that could be transformed. Mm-hmm. So saying which, I think I know you're familiar with the idea of archetypes, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. And that archetypes are these symbols of our own human motivations or values and personalities. And I believe that we all have a village inside of us, an archetype.
Mm-hmm.
And a question that I could ask anyone would be like, would you kill? Are you a killer? Zoran, are you a killer?
I don't know. Interesting question.
Yeah. I'll say, are you a killer? Would you murder someone?
Yeah. Somebody asked me that question long time ago, and I said no, explicitly, immediately. And that person came back to me and said, now you have kids. And this was when I get both of my kids. And she asked me again, now you have kids. Would you kill for your kids? And this was the first time that I stopped, and I was like, oh, I don't know what to say now. Yeah. Because there was this archetype of father protector who is going to do whatever it needs to be done in order to protect his family. So I was not able to say before that I was, you know what I mean? Because before that, happy, free, nobody to care about, nobody to protect besides myself, So it's an interesting question.
It's a really, and just like what you just said, well, you're a father, and if you're a father, you're a husband, or you're a son. And if that person or people that you dearly love when you're home and someone came in to your home in the middle of the night with a gun, would you do whatever it takes to protect your family, even if it would be
act of murder?
Do the thing that that you would never do. And it's an archetype that arises instinctively. It's this one that arises from survival.
Yes.
And we have these archetypes. We have a village inside of us that will come out if it's triggered by something.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that and think that really, familiarizing with our archetypes, the ones that come out to play when we least expect them to.
Yeah. So what
really
are the
more powerful,
Very powerful. So what are, for some people who don't know any of the archetypes, what would you say the typical one that will show up that you see?
Well,
mother, sister, brother, of course, family.
Well, it's interesting because we're both coaches, and I find that coaches, because I'm also a supervisor, of coaches, I find that the one of the caregiver comes up a lot, right?
Yes.
And symbolically, if we think of the attributes of a caregiver, the caregiver is really positive.
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't like to be a caregiver?
Of course.
We take care, we take care.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the two sides of the coin is that positive attributes are also, there's a shadow.
So each archetype, like for example, caregiver, if it overdoes it in a caregiving, will activate the shadow part of the archetype that works against them, not for them, right? So it's about balance.
Yeah. And so if we're unaware of the shadow of the caregiver, which is perhaps to not have boundaries, to give to the extent that it's at the cost of the self. And there are many other aspects that we can even think about if we were to explore it, would be interesting, for each of us to explore.
I'm definitely a caregiver. I've been conditioned historical imprint, and for me, it's a clear line. If I look at my life from the early childhood, the circumstances, the environment, the family constellation, everything that was happening was conditioning me to be caregiver, and that shows up in my life. I'm completely aware, and also you're so precise, because if you go to the shadow, giving on expense to yourself, not taking care of yourself first, but then giving and giving and giving to the point of exhaustion, and then the caregiver moves into resentment because I'm giving so much and nobody's loving me for what I'm doing right now, and you go into the victim. It's interesting, isn't it? But what you're saying is that we need to be aware of that archetype that we're playing in the moment to help ourselves understand those imprints that are driving that archetype forward.
And furthermore, if we took it even one step further and say, so how did I learn to be a caregiver? Or where does that come from in my family of origin?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know in my case, it comes from my mother.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my mother was actually a nurse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, you know, of course, not everyone's mother is going to be a nurse if they're a caregiver, but it's just, you know, just really looking at like, where are some of the family dynamics that we learned that, yeah, we learned that symbolism, or even if you took another one, which is completely different, is to be the jester or the comic, yeah, the one who loves to joke and
yes,
yeah, is the joker, always has a quick joke, is a really quick wit.
Yep.
And sometimes the joke or the shadow of that is that they make jokes to cover up their pain.
Definitely. I have that one as well. You're reading.
We all have these parts, yeah?
It's like, okay, I surrender. Yes.
Yeah. And I have to be the life and soul of this party, because without me here, you know, who will keep these people together?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's another. And then that, imagine that's really comfortable. Actually, it's a comfortable archetype to show up in an organization.
Of course.
People love people who make jokes.
Yes. Yes, they love people. And what is the shadow side of this gesture clown?
It's a mask. As you said, it's a clown. It's a mask.
Mm-hmm. So you don't really never get to really know them, you know, if they go into that direction. So they keep that appearance, and then they're not really authentic to themselves and other people. So you don't know them. Interesting.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? And there could be other ones as well. So in the words of Joseph Campbell, I suppose, you know, we're all on our own hero's journey. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as we move through life, you know, we might have archetypes that are activated or more present.
Mm-hmm. Then
as we seek resolution with it, you know, something else might come up, you know.
Yeah, so I love that idea, Sabreena, of, you know, we all being a archetype in our hero's journey, and what's going on in our life in that hero's quest. The different archetype will show up at the different times, and we need to be awakened into using the positive part of it, because not everything is negative. Certain archetypes that carry that energy that is necessary for us in that given moment to do what we need to do or to be who we need to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And especially these days, we really need to have like the positive parts showing up and playing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How do we keep ourselves in balance in order for us to be able to become aware of our imprints and kind of notice them, observe them, choose response versus reaction, which is always very important, and then become aware of what is the archetype that is playing in my life right now, and how can I keep myself in balance to really capitalize on that? So for me, it's already something shifts when we are in conversation with ourselves. And in this case, we are having this conversation with each other. Mm-hmm. So I feel that it's already making something more conscious in me, as it might be in you, I don't know. But every single conversation is an opportunity of, you know, to observe the inner witness. And so there was one phrase that I would use, is to make something conscious is also to change it. As soon as we become aware of a dynamic, mm-hmm. it shifts it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
So that journey, I feel, is really an important one developmentally, in leadership as well as in personal development, because it's really about self-leadership, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When we are being able to lead ourselves in a way that we are being able to embrace our best selves, then that flourishes and shows up in all the different parts of our lives. And really also embracing those parts. And when I say embracing, rather than criticizing or being judgmental of that parts of ourselves that we don't even really like.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are archetypes that we might not like, that we've learned from our upbringing. But when we acknowledge it, we haven't really talked about parts that we don't like. But when we acknowledge that they exist, I think something changes, rather than punishing ourselves for that it exists.
Or feeling guilty, or feeling,
Useless.
Yes, useless. Yeah.
Helpless.
Helpless. I know. Acknowledgement and becoming aware and really shining the light. And Matt Kahn, that I really love, he says, that the way to transformation is that we need to love whatever arises inside of ourselves. Like a good stuff, especially the bad stuff, and it shows up in your life. How can you love that part of you, see it for what it is, understand where does it come from, and then through this compassion and love and this gentle inquiry, give it the space to express and then transform.
Yeah, I love that, the gentle inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually feel we are not gentle enough with ourselves.
Me too. I think that.
Me too.
I think that exactly. Humanity, us, we're not gentle with ourselves. Yeah.
We're not gentle enough with ourselves.
Mm. What a wonderful conversation. And I love what you said, towards the end of this recording, that this awareness can come through this conversation, because as you and I are talking, I'm becoming more aware and you're becoming more aware. So these soul conversations that we sometimes call coaching, sometimes we call them counseling, sometimes it's therapy, are so important, because that's the space when people can become fully aware and held in a way that they can become awakened to certain realities.
Yeah. I think this is really where the biggest gift we can give somebody else is the space to be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
If we just hold that space in a way that the other can give room to themselves to bring whatever they want to talk about, then that whatever they bring can be really quite transformative, for them and for us. Because I find that I learn as much as I shape.
Yes. Me too. And I think that's, for people who are in personal development, professional people who are passionate about this topic, I think that's a wonderful thing, that we all learn as much as we shape consistently, because for me, that's the only authentic way, isn't it?
Yeah. And whatever comes in the moment is going to come. It's going to come. And just get out of the way.
So we're kind of wrapping up slowly. Where would you like to leave audience with? How do you feel right now? What wants to come with you and through you right now? Where would you like to leave this conversation? And how would you like to say bye to these people who are listening to us at this moment in time?
I think it's the idea of, like, if you'd like to start on this journey, part of that would be to even just inquire, go into inquiry. And I think of it as like reflective journaling. It doesn't have to be on paper. It could be on your mobile. Sometimes I pull up my mobile and I'll write like little notes to myself, and really fast, really quickly write down, symbolic characters that you might resonate with in movies. Yeah. And those characters are archetypes on some level. It's really inviting yourself to see what resonates for you with those characters is a start to seeing what exists inside of you. Yeah.
I would also add, be playful, because this understanding your imprints and history behind your conditioning and how you became who you are right now. It doesn't need to be painful journey. Sometimes it can be, but also can be playful because it's an adventure of you getting to know you and you decoding you and you hacking you, like hacking your software and then replacing this with something that you want to choose in this lifetime right now, because we have choice, right? We have free will. We can choose anytime to change, to evolve, to grow. Yeah.
And what you said earlier on is that you don't need to do it on your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't need to do it on your own. And it's a lot of fun when you do it with a person or with people.
Yes. Yes. And when we were living in communities in a long time ago, that happened in community by itself, right? We were never alone. There is our new realities and of our sophistication and living separately and having our personal space, which is absolutely lovely. But I think that the power of community is also important. And how do you create community of your coaches, of your friends, of your advisors, of people who really want to be part of your life journey? And then you also give back and you become part of theirs. I think that you don't need to do it alone. Sometimes we get a little bit shy to ask for support.
And that's how we find our tribe.
And that's how we find our tribe. Exactly. And that's how we branch into our tribe. So we are very happy that you are part of our tribe and that you tuned in and listened to this elevated conversation. I would call it like elevated conversation because it was feeling like Sabreena and I were drinking this Japanese or Chinese tea. We were at a tea ceremony and there were layers of conversations happening on so many different levels. So we really hope you're going to be able to integrate, to listen again, to really assimilate this information into your heart and to feel that elevation that we wanted to offer today. So Sabreena, thank you so much for coming to this podcast.
And thank you for the invitation.
Yes. And if you want to find out more about Sabreena, we're going to reference her LinkedIn, her Instagram, her website, and all of the social media. And then you can find her, engage with her, and benefit from her beautiful and gentle wisdom. Sometimes can get pissed off, but most of the time.
Thanks for the postscript. Thanks, Zoran.
Next time, enjoy. Lots of love. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.